Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel on histological techniques. This is video 2 in a series of new videos this semester where I'm trying to keep up with providing a video that mirrors the content that we're covering here at QUT. So last week I introduced the concept of pigments and we broadly defined what they are, that being elements of color that we can already see are present within a tissue section independently of having applied any dyes or stains to the tissue. We also briefly introduced the concept of some simple tests or procedures that can be used to help you identify what those pigments are. And we specifically looked at melanin bleach in the case of where there is melanin present within a section that you may wish to identify either through bleaching or potentially to remove it if it's interfering with your ability to see other things. We also talked about solubility tests, and in particular, we had a demonstration of formalin pigment and how simply soaking the slide in a saturated alcoholic solution of picric acid for 30 minutes, that's sufficient to actually solubilize and to remove the formalin pigment from the slide. And just while on that point, I need to remember to mention that I will be posting a series of rather short videos that actually demonstrate all of these procedures. Many of them are very short. So yeah, but if I put them all together here, it's going to make these videos unnecessarily long. So, but yeah, if you're interested in getting a blow-by-blow, step-by-step procedure along with concentrations of reagents used, I will be posting those over the next couple of weeks, hopefully. Okay, so where we left off things the other day is I had a rather poor demonstration of a melanin bleach by one of our students in week 1, which really surprised me because the majority of students were actually producing excellent slides, but sometimes it happens, just you know, minor things happen, time pressures and everything else. So what we have here is, and I'll just move over to the microscope here by sharing. Well, I won't actually share it through that camera. I've got 2 cameras going here at the moment, making things very complicated. So I'll just bear with me while I correct all these things here. So I'll just do that, and then I'll do that, and that'll then bring up the screen. And so I'm recording that as well. Okay, so this is the example of melanoma that we looked at last week. And I'll just bring it to focus on the screen there. Just bring it up to a high power. Okay, so this is a H&E stain section, but obviously there's a lot more going on there. And so you can see there's a lot of very prominent browny, sort of, well, mostly brown, I guess, pigment that you can see on top of what would otherwise be a H&E section. And I believe this is skin, but most of the architecture has been lost, so it's quite difficult to see that. So here we have these very prominent melanin granules. Why would you want to then bleach that? Well, it's a rather simple procedure. It doesn't take that long. It's basically 5 minutes in the acidified potassium permanganate, which itself is a lovely color, but you don't actually exploit that. It just basically oxidizes the melanin granules, and then you follow that up with a brief treatment in oxalic acid, owing to a slight discoloration of the tissue caused by the potassium permanganate. So those 2 things in combination will then lead us to this result. And so this is more typical of the results that you should obtain. I think last week, you remember in the previous video, Pigments 1, there was still quite a bit of residual brown yellow staining within these melanoma cells. But on this occasion, if I just focus that a bit better there, we can see that, you know, there's quite clear nuclei. There's a little bit of cytoplasm, with background staining with hematoxylin, and there's just a little bit of eosin staining up some residual collagen fibers, which are found in that little bit of remaining extracellular matrix. But as you can see, this is almost like a cell block, in that the concentration of these melanoma cells is so high that we're predominantly seeing that and not much else. Okay, so that was the melanin bleach that I promised I would show you after not having actually demonstrated that very well in the previous video. Okay, so what I'd like to spend the remainder of my time this week is actually looking at reactions that can be used to create color other than the brown yellow pigment that we see. So whether we're talking about bile pigment, which is kind of brown yellow, or if we're talking about hemosiderin, which is quite brown, or if we're talking about melanin that's quite brown, there may be some morphological and contextual features there that help us to identify what those things are. But through exploiting chemical reactions, which sometimes are not entirely specific, but within the context of how they're being used, it is very straightforward to provide some extra information that actually confirms that either we're looking at bile, or we're looking at melanin, or we're looking at iron. And the iron story is a little bit more complicated, as we'll discuss a little bit later on, depending upon the source. But ferric, that is Fe3+ ions, are generally what we're looking for. Okay, so let's begin with a stain reaction called Schmarl's. And so Schmarl's is the one that we did look at very briefly last week. And in fact, what I will do, I'll just go back to the previous slide. The H&E non-bleached slide, and I'll intentionally come down to, there's an area here, if I can just find it. I had it before. Do I have it on the right end? I don't. I've got it around the wrong way. My apologies for that. I'll bring that down here. Just to show you some sort of, I guess, markers for an area that we can come back to on the other slide. So we can see here, there are some prominent nerve bundles out here within this extracellular matrix. And then over here, we've got the melanin, so we can then just focus in on that. And once again, we can actually demonstrate how we've got that sort of brown pigment in a number of those cells. It's a little bit sparse in this area, but you can see a little bit there of the brown and a bit more up in here as well. Okay, some nice little areas of pigmentation there. So why I wanted to show you that slide first is because these are serial sections from the same block. So now if I orientate this one and move that to the same location, just bear with me. There we go. So there's you can just see them very faintly. Obviously, we haven't actually stained them up as well here, because this is not a H&E. We've actually got a counterstain of nuclear fast red. So it's not actually lighting those up particularly well. But you can see there's those nerve bundles that we just had a moment ago within that connective tissue, another nerve bundle here. And so now if we move over to that same location where we had the melanin, and now you can already see at this low magnification the outcome of the Schmarl stain, which is to have converted what was previously those brown yellow substances within the cytoplasm of these melanoma cells. And now we can see quite clearly that there is a very dark greeny blue color. Okay, so how does that work? Well, as I briefly mentioned last week, one of the features of melanin that you can exploit histochemically, and we've seen this in other videos that I've presented on silver stains, is that melanin has the ability to reduce other molecules, other chemicals. It behaves as a reducing agent. And so we can use that chemically by using it, by exploiting it as a reducing agent to create color, if appropriate chemicals that will change color when they're reduced are actually put in contact. And that's what we've done in this situation here. So Schmarl's exploits the reductive properties of melanin to reduce ferric ions. And again, we'll come back to this again a bit later with some of the other stains, but this is Fe3 plus ions in solution. So when they come into contact with the melanin, they will be reduced to ferrous ions, Fe2 plus. And when this whole process is performed in the presence of potassium ferricyanide, what you will actually get is a complex forming between those ferrous ions, which are being created in the vicinity of where the melanin is. They will automatically combine with the potassium ferricyanide. In fact, in solution, the potassium comes off, the ferrous ions compete for that, and you get a complex. And this complex of ferrous ferricyanide is this beautiful, intense, dark green-blue color that you can see here, otherwise referred to as Turnbull's blue. So it's a really elegant way to exploit, I guess, ion chemistry, the chemistry combined with cyanide salts, and ultimately using the properties of melanin as a reducing agent in order to generate this nice, vibrant color. And as I think I've already mentioned, the nuclear fast red is the counterstain there. With all counterstains, you don't want that to be overbearing, and I think on this occasion this has worked quite well. You can see it's just a nice complementary light nuclear staining, which together demonstrates the Schmarl's stain technique. Okay, so as I said, I will provide another video where I specifically show you the blow-by-blow steps to do this, concentrations, how you prepare your reagents. It is still quite a short procedure, but nonetheless, for those who actually want to focus on that, there will be a separate video that will be posted at some point. Okay, so moving on to the two other pigment reactions that we'll cover today will be Hall's stain, which is a very commonly used stain for bile pigment. Again, we're exploiting a chemical reaction. And then we'll move on to Pearl stain, which, like Schmarl's, actually exploits ion histochemistry. Okay, so we'll start with the Hall's stain. Got too many slides out here. So bring that up here. Bring it to focus, drop down to the lowest power. So we're actually looking at a couple of stains here, and I'll refer you to some of my earlier videos to get the rest of this. But here we can see in this area here, we've got this beautiful, vibrant green color. And this has been created by oxidizing the bile pigment, which was previously in this section, and appearing quite a yellow-brown color. And we saw that in the previous video. So if you want to go back, you're welcome to go and have a look at that. But yeah, what we're actually doing here is that, still using iron actually, we're exploiting ferric chloride, this time as an oxidizing agent in the presence of trichloroacetic acid. And when combined together, this reagent known as Fouché's reagent has been around for many years, I think originally used as a way of detecting bile salts in solution. But some very elegant work by Mary Jo Hall back in 1960 basically applied that concept to illustrate bile pigments within tissue sections. And as you can see, it quite clearly, by virtue of this avocado green or olive green color there, is a diagnostic way of demonstrating that bile as being separate from other things, okay? So melanin won't do this, hemosiderin won't do this, but when you combine, as I said, the ferric chloride with the trichloroacetic acid, and again, I'll provide the full details in subsequent videos, you get that nice vibrant green color. Now, previously we used the nuclear fast red as our counterstain. This time we've used Van Gieson's solution. So as you may recall from an earlier video, Van Gieson's solution is equally elegant, very simple 2-minute stain where you get partitioning of 2 molecular weight dyes, picric acid and acid fuchsin, preferentially such that the larger of those 2 dyes will partition into collagen and extracellular matrix components, whereas the smaller of those 2 dyes, the picric acid, will partition itself into cell cytoplasm and especially red blood cells that tend to light up most intense yellow. So this is applied right at the end, okay? So you do your Hall stain, get the color reaction, and then a couple of minutes in the Van Giesen solution, very rapid dehydration. You need to be very careful not to wash out this counterstain. So it's very brief, dips in absolute alcohol straight to xylene. And in fact, we normally blot the slide first before we go to the absolute alcohol. And this is the outcome that you get. So it's a really nice, straightforward stain. And as I said, it is a classic method for demonstrating bile. And chemically, what we're looking at here is biliverdin. Okay, so biliverdin is originally formed during the breakdown of red blood cells within the body, and then it circulates to the liver, where it can be subsequently converted into bilirubin, which is the more yellow or red color that is stored there. But we can return it through oxidation to this vibrant green biliverdin, and that's what has happened here in this slide. Okay, so moving on now to our last of these chemical reactions. Again, we're exploiting iron chemistry. On this occasion, we are now looking to exploit the properties of also, again, our cyanide salts to demonstrate the presence of hemosiderin. So in this case, we've got liver, and in the H&E version of this slide, in fact, we had an example last week, we showed some brown particulate material within the cytoplasm of these hepatocytes. And of course, without actually performing the appropriate reaction, you cannot be absolutely sure of what you're actually looking at. So therefore, by employing this Pearl's reaction, it's a classic way of determining that this brown pigmentation that we see is related to ferric ions. So again, this is Fe3+. On this occasion, these ferric ions are actually present within this hemosiderin, okay? In order to cause this reaction, we need to release those ferric ions locally into solution, and that's done through using hydrochloric acid, some dilute hydrochloric acid that's combined. In this occasion, we're combining that with potassium ferrocyanide, such that once the ferric ions are released, they become immediately available to complex with the ferrocyanide, producing what we see here, which looks very similar to Turnbull's blue, but we actually refer to this as Pearl's Prussian blue. So this is ferric ferrocyanide, whereas Turnbull's blue was ferrous ferricyanide. So it's simply just a change in those oxidation states, but when they all combine, we get what appears to be a fairly similar blue color. I tend to think the Prussian blue looks a little bit more vibrant blue than the Turnbull blue. But in any case, it's a really lovely stain. And of course, you can probably pick out what the counterstain is here. Again, it's using nuclear fast red just to provide that really nice complementary color. If we look around the slide, I noticed it before, but I think I should just point it out. There are some other things in here. So you can see some annoying bit of other kind of pigment there. Look, it's not unusual occasionally to find bits of insoluble dye floating around, but that actually looks to me like it might be some formalin pigment. within this section as well. So obviously, if you found that and you've realized, oh, that's a bit of a pain, well, you could go back with another section, do the treatment for formalin pigment removal, which would help to identify it, and also remove it from what is otherwise a really nice pearl stain. Okay, so now the final thing that I'd like to present is some rather creative work that we've done here in the laboratory. One of the benefits of being in a teaching laboratory rather than a routine diagnostic laboratory is that you really have the time to research and to explore and try different combinations. And in doing so, we actually build our understanding of the way that these stains work, and you also gain a better understanding of their limitations. So, you know, how you can combine various stains together, what things are, I guess, complementary, whereas other times you might find that it's not possible to combine different stains together. And so Chris Casier, who is our senior scientific officer here in the histo teaching lab, he's always coming up with some lovely combinations of things, and I thought I would share some of those with you. So we're still on Pearl's stain, and what we have here is a very hemorrhagic bit of lung tissue, and I'll just let you take that in for a moment. Look at the colors there. It's beautiful, isn't it? So we've got these round looking cells here clustered here. We've got some smaller cells. You don't actually see much in the way of normal lung. I might see a little bit of an alveolus there, for example. May have a bit of, potentially a bit of carbon or something in there. I didn't mention that previously, but you can also get exogenous pigments that can end up sometimes in tissue, related to, in this case, obviously to inhalation. So it's not unusual to find a bit of that in the lung. But this lovely color that you can see here is actually pearl stain, as I've said, in combination with the nuclear fast red counterstain. But then what Chris has also applied here is a Van Gieson stain as well. So remember the acid fuchsin, the pink dye that we see here, that is partitioning out into relatively larger open spaces like collagen. Seems to be staining a bit of the cytoplasm as well. And then we've got the yellow picric acid being a smaller, relatively smaller dye, is partitioning into those red blood cells. So it's a lovely outcome, isn't it? That yellow, pink and blue together. And the pathophysiology here of what we're seeing in this bit of very hemorrhagic lung tissue in response to the excessive amount of bleeding that's taken place, there will naturally be a breakdown of those red blood cells over time. And so what we see here is referred to as histiocytes, these monocyte-derived cells that have come in to clean that up and to obviously ingest that iron-rich material. And then by virtue of the fact that there is conversion of that to ferric ions, these histiocytes are stained up this lovely bright blue color. So it's a really nice demonstration of pearl stain, but it's just something that you may not always consider, may not be necessary, but it's a really nice combination that could have applications clinically, perhaps. I don't think you'd probably get a call for this very often, but in terms of just the aesthetics of it, it's a really lovely combination of dyes, and it does demonstrate how these things are quite complementary. So, you know, if you come along at the end of pearls and just take two dyes of different molecular weights and allow them to partition, that's not interfering with anything that we've previously done, okay? And so in doing that, we then finish with the blotting, the rapid dehydration and absolute alcohol through to xylene, cover slip, and you get something like that. Now, as you know, Van Gieson stain on its own is typically used in combination with an iron-based hematoxylin. So what would happen if we used an iron-based hematoxylin, that is Weigert's or Weigert's hematoxylin, which uses ferric chloride as the mordant? what might that look like, and how would that interfere with what happens with the pearls? Now, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure the order that Chris applied these stains, but I'm going to take a guess that, well, I'm really not sure, but let's have a look and maybe we can work it out together. You will see it's a very different outcome. Again, it's a hemorrhagic bit of lung tissue. Straight away, you can see there's a lot of what appears to be green background. Let's go to the high power where we can maybe see a few things more clearly. All right, so this is quite interesting here. So you notice that there is some collagen here. It got a bit of a dusky darkness to it. That would suggest maybe a little bit of under-differentiation of the Weigert's hematoxylin. There's your Weigert's hematoxylin, which is giving this lovely sort of almost black, well, it looks black here, in this combination. So in terms of critiquing this as a Van Gieson stain with the Weigert's hematoxylin, it's good, and maybe with a bit further differentiation, maybe needed a dip or two in acid alcohol just to lighten that up, then the collagen would be a shade brighter. But because of that nice black color that you get with the Weigert's, it's giving really nice clear demonstration of all these nuclei. And importantly, it's not interfered with the pearl stain itself. Now, as I said, I'll have to check with Chris. Perhaps I'll mention it in the next video. But yeah, it does, well, certainly the Weigert's was added before the Van Gieson. That's how we typically do it. But this actually suggests to me that what's happened is, I think the Weigert's hematoxylin was done right at the start. And of course, that's what you normally do with the Van Gieson. Why I think that was done before the pearls reaction is, notice how the red blood cells are kind of green. Now, it's not unusual with using your Weigert's hematoxylin to get a little bit of background in the tissue, that is non-specifically. And since we can see from the color of the collagen, which is kind of a dirty pink, that also suggests that we've got some significant background there. So I think that was done first. Then I think we had the pearls reaction being applied. And so what we're actually seeing here, you know, that sort of yellowy background of some picric acid in there, which would normally stain the red blood cells. But in combination with that, we're getting a sort of a bluey coloration from the residual iron, the ferric ions that are there. And so they are obviously giving a light shade of blue on top. So what we're actually looking at here is a combination of the picric acid being yellow combined with probably some background staining for the residual iron that's there. And that gives you this kind of green color. So does it work? I think it actually still works pretty well. I don't know whether you would want to bother doing it, but you know, it actually, in many respects, because we can see nuclear detail very strongly, this may be a preference rather than the other combination that I just showed you, where we haven't employed a nuclear stain. Well, there might have been some nuclear fast red, yeah. So I think the Weigert's hematoxylin certainly stands out much more strongly there. Okay, and then finally for today, this is a bit of a segue into the videos over the next couple of weeks, where the class is going to be exploring in detail the histochemical processes that we exploit to stain mucus substances. And so there are several videos that I've already covered on this. We talk about the PAS stain for neutral mucins and polysaccharides, glycoproteins, and we talk a lot about silver stains, which are essentially exploiting carbohydrate chemistry as well. Here's a lovely combination that Chris has produced for us during the week, and we'll just get an opportunity to to enjoy this. This is the PAS stain, which, as I said, is a stain for neutral mucins, polysaccharide in the form of glycogen, and also many glycoproteins. Again, sticking with the pigment theme, this is a stain for pearls in liver, and you can see some really lovely blue color there, showing up the hemosiderin quite well. And this has actually been done in combination with not only the PAS stain, which on this occasion is showing some glycogen granules here in the cytoplasm. The reason why it's perhaps not as clear as it might otherwise be is that Chris has also attempted, just out of curiosity, to perform a Van Gieson stain as well. Doesn't say whether he's got nuclear fast red. I don't think, no, I think that's just sort of background staining there. So, but look, it's a really interesting combination. I'll try and find a better area. Here we've got some streaming artifact here. You can see how the glycogen is all pushed to one side. That's just an artifact of processing where it's not particularly well fixed with formaldehyde. And so then subsequently, when it goes onto the tissue processor and the alcohol comes rushing in, it has that effect of sort of picking up and dragging those, dragging those glycogen granules to the other side of the cell. Obviously, it's quite a fatty liver. You can see there's large spaces here where the fatty deposits have been removed, but it's also showing us quite nicely these hemosiderin deposits as well. So we've never done this before, but you know, I told Chris that we're getting creative this week, and I reminded him of this lovely slide that he'd produced previously, and he's just gone off and, as usual, comes up with these lovely combinations. So what can we learn from this? Well, I think it demonstrates the type of outcome that you can obtain when you have mastery of these techniques, when you understand the histochemistry and what is likely to interfere with something else. You can actually combine these things in such a way that, look, it may just be for artistic pleasure, but it may actually provide you with more information. So in this occasion, you would definitely do the Van Gieson last. There's no question about that, because of its susceptibility to being easily removed by rinsing. And so that's why we employ the blotting and the very quick dips in absolute alcohol right at the end prior to xylene as a way to retain those stains. What is of interest to me is to know what order was the PAS stain and the pearl stain employed. I'm going to guess that you could probably do those in either order, but I think it would be worth experimenting. And I will actually follow up with Chris during the week just to ask him how he actually did that. Obviously, there's an oxidation step involved, using periodic acid to convert your glycogen into those dialdehyde grooves, which will then react with your Schiff's reagent. I can't imagine that any of that would have interfered with then subsequently going in with your reagents, your hydrochloric acid, and your potassium ferrocyanide. I don't think that would have interfered with it, but I've not tried it, so I'll check with Chris. Equally, I think if you'd done this the other way around, what would be the risk? So if you go in with periodic acid and you're oxidizing the tissue, what effect would that have on the Pearl's Prussian blue that's already there? I would like to think that maybe by virtue of it complexing and forming this insoluble salt, I would hazard a guess and say that it's fairly stable. But yeah, it'd be interesting to have a discussion about that with Chris. So in any case, I think that's plenty for today. Thank you for your attention once again. I hope you've enjoyed some of these unusual combinations of stains that we've presented here today. Next week, as I've said, we're going to move on to mucosubstances. And so I hope you'll join me then. But until then, bye for now.